Hey everyone, Fan here, and welcome back to Tips and Tricks. Since part 3 hit our view goal, I decided that you guys should pick what I cover next, and with a whopping 50%, bosses won. So today, we'll be focusing on that and how you can make them effective with the help of these 6 tips. Without further ado, let's get to it! Tip number 1. Experiment with unique arenas. In the Mega Man series, it's usually common for a boss arena to be a flat floor. However, depending on the boss, this can be a little bland. While it's not mandatory to make the coolest arena ever, it's still a good idea to try out unique layouts and see what works. Now, it's still necessary for the layout to fit the boss's pattern and increase the fun factor. In fact, Mega Man 9 does this for a lot of bosses, but a primary example is Plugman. This arena has multiple tiles for Plugman to jump over, and allows his plug balls to crawl in unique ways. However, you can take advantage of this too, by jumping over Plugman and his electric balls. Now, it doesn't have to be as complex as you may think. Some arenas have simpler layouts for bosses to interact with, such as Hornet Man and Pharaoh Man. Just remember, it's not mandatory to have an outstanding, one-of-a-kind showdown, but if you find your boss being a bit bland, it's a good idea to experiment with some unique layouts. Tip number 2. Use your gimmicks. If you don't like the idea of custom arenas, a good alternative is using your stage's gimmicks. As mentioned before in the previous part, depending on your boss, they might be able to interact with them. For instance, Charge Man and Nitro Man can walk on the Shu-Pu-Pon rails, and Time Man can activate time blocks. This is, of course, another optional choice. However, I encourage taking advantage of this tip more than the first for one main reason. It makes your gimmick come full circle here. You used it during the stage, so using it during the boss unlocks a bunch of potential. Mega Man 2 does this with Metal Man's arena. Throughout the fight, you're forced to move with the conveyor belt and dodge his metal blades. What's more, the belt changes every 5 seconds, so you have to adapt to that too. Sometimes, the gimmick can even contribute to the weakness. As shown in Cutman's and Terra's boss fights, you use the blocks to defeat them. This is a great way to make your fights engaging and even wrap a pretty bow with your level. Tip number 3. Semi-solids can help. If unique arenas and gimmicks aren't doing it for you, then there's always a third option. Semi-solids, specifically the ones from Mega Man 10. These can help you create a very unique boss fight. Depending on the boss's pattern, you can put these semi-solids in specific places to alter their movement. The easiest bosses to do this on are the ones who mainly jump. However, it's also important to know that you should be able to use these platforms effectively too. This arena, for instance, has 3 platforms, one at the center with 2 slightly below. The player can use these bottom semi-solids to dodge Napalm Man's missiles, and the top one to weave your way through his leaps. So now that we talked about the boss arena itself, let's move on to some fundamental tips. Tip number 4. Make sure your weaknesses fit. Every boss contains 2 types of weaknesses, a primary and a secondary. There's also an immunity, which we'll talk about later. It's important to know how these weaknesses can impact a boss fight, so let's talk about them. First up is primary weaknesses. This will be the weapon that deals the most amount of damage. One thing that most people might not know is that these weaknesses don't equal a free button, meaning you mash the button to get the win. Well, that's most of the time. Essentially, the player has to use them in creative ways in order to win, like using Rebound Striker against Sheep Man or Magma Bazooka against Hornet Man. Finding out the weakness of a boss is great, but finding how to use it effectively bumps that shit up to 10. Another factor that some Mega Man games do is giving the boss an interaction when hit by the weakness. It's a fun thing to do to reward the player. However, this can lead to the weakness being the win button, so if you decide to implement this, I highly recommend making sure the weakness doesn't completely break the boss. One detail I should add is that the weakness should make sense. From a Pokemon-like perspective, Cho'Man's weak to Solar Blaze because fire can melt ice. Or from a gameplay perspective, Splash Woman's weak to Hornet Chaser because the Hornets lock onto her regardless of where she goes. Next up are secondary weaknesses. Other than being the next best option, secondary weaknesses can provide other strategies to defeat a boss. Mega Man 2 has numerous weaknesses, but Woodman in particular has unique ones. You could use Atomic Fire to deal massive damage. However, you have to wait until Woodman releases his Leaf Shield to deal said damage. One of his secondary weaknesses, Air Shooter, also deals massive damage, but it can pierce his shield, preventing you from waiting. Unfortunately, secondary weaknesses in Maker makes the weapon deal 2 damage, unless it's a charged weapon, which in this case deals more. A good tip I have is that if you have your Buster set to no charge, and if you want a fast-paced fight, toggle it as the secondary weakness. This way the fight goes smoother without sacrificing quality. Otherwise, the next best thing is to figure out which weapon provides a good alternative strategy to your fight. Once you find a good weapon, set it as the secondary weakness. Last up are immunities. These are not really weaknesses, but rather weapons that don't work or even absorbed by your boss. Usually this comes from both the Pokemon perspective and a gameplay perspective. For instance, from a gameplay perspective, Needleman has 2 immunities, Hard Knuckle and Spark Shock, both of which are not an effective way of defeating him. From a Pokemon perspective, Metal Man is immune to Bubble Lead because his Metal Blade can easily pop bubbles. Unfortunately, Mega Man Maker contains only 1 immunity, so it's recommended to find the worst weapon to face off against your boss. Man, they need to add more weaknesses and immunities. Tip number 5. Communicate the aspects well. This is one thing that is imperative for you to do to make your boss good. If you don't communicate the aspects, the player won't know what to do, resulting in a dull fight. Usually, these aspects are the boss's pattern and the weakness. However, since we talked about those already, let's take a step further and talk about the background elements. When I hop on Mega Man Maker and play a couple levels, I usually see unusual terrain, some gimmicks, and supporting enemies in the arenas. If used, it's very important to make sure these elements are visually clear to the player, so they can react accordingly to the environment. Take this level here for example. It may look very pretty, but every element shown is present. No decorations are obscuring the spikes and springs, and the Thunderclaw paws here are a different color compared to the background. The player is even given time to observe the arena and strategize. A big piece of advice I can give is to not over-decorate your arena. This usually causes things to get obscured, leading to the player not knowing what to do. So finding that balance between aesthetic and design is key to communicating these aspects. Tip number 6. Multiple bosses work. This is one thing that I see happen quite frequently, and I actually enjoy this a lot. However, it's still important to make the encounter fun rather than overwhelming. This can be done in a couple ways. A common way is to have one boss perform an attack to dodge, while the other one is active for the whole fight. An alternative way, and a really cool way at that, is making it multiple phases. The first boss acts as the first, while the next boss acts as another phase. There is one thing that needs to be noted. Each boss should synergize well with the others, and form an engaging pattern that never gets dull. However, it's also important to make sure that it's not unfair. Working with 2 bosses can be a lot, and depending on the bosses you use, there can be numerous setups to use. Here's a couple layouts for example. As for some examples on what bosses to use, a great pair is Stone Man and Splash Woman. Splash stays below, firing laser tridents from above, while you're focused on Stone Man, who's always jumping at you. The laser tridents might even encourage you to back away, leading Stone Man to use his Power Stone. One thing I can advise is to experiment with the numerous bosses in the game and see which ones go well with each other, then try to see if you can use that pair in very creative ways. If you reached the end, thank you for watching! When it comes to boss design, it can be pretty tricky, but hopefully these 6 tips can help you design some very cool encounters. If you liked this video, leave a like and subscribe to see more Mega Man Maker content in the near future. If you like this series, share this video with some of your friends and help reach that view goal of 150 plus views. Until next time, I'll see you all in the next video. Peace!